keeping this war going is not pro-Ukraine, it's anti-Ukraine. The overwhelming majority of the Ukrainian people want a negotiated peace. If Donald Trump follows through on the logic of the situation, it doesn't matter what Macron, Merz, and Starmer and Zelensky say.
Jeffrey Sachs just revealed what Donald Trump could actually do to end the U.S. proxy war versus Russia, establish peace in Ukraine, and get the U.S. the hell out of this theater. And in this clip, he explores why, despite the propaganda in Western media, Ukrainian citizens don't want this war to continue, with mass demonstrations and political scandals that Zelensky is wrapped up in that are being completely ignored over here. So let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
If you and I had been a fly on the wall at 10 Downing Street yesterday when President Zelensky met with Prime Minister Starmer, President Macron, and Chancellor Merz, I mean, what would we have heard? What can they give him? They can't raise taxes. They can't borrow money, and Belgium won't let them steal the Russian bank accounts. What are they going to do for him?
Let's first start from the situation with Merz, Macron, and Starmer. I just looked at the most recent posted approval ratings. Merz is at 29%. Starmer, I think it was 23%. Macron, 12%.
Wow.
It's rounding error to zero, by the way. So these are three failed politicians who spend their time meeting Zelensky. Unbelievable. All three of them have a domestic economic crisis that they refuse to attend to because of their warmongering. And all three of them are proclaiming all sorts of aims that they have absolutely no way to achieve. Now, their last gambit is that since they don't have the money and they don't have the arms, they are going to confiscate or steal Russia's financial assets, which were on an account in a Belgian-based institution called Euroclear, and they will take that money and they will use it to buy weapons from the United States so that Ukrainians can continue to die for the next year or two until Russia crushes all of this.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. The incentive structure is for the Europeans to keep this thing going despite the results. We've played through this experiment for over 3 years, 3.5 years, nearing 4 years now, where not $200 billion from the United States in the hands of Zelensky has turned the tides on this war. Zelensky still inhabits, something like 80% of what was Ukraine. Russia controls now something like 20% of it and something like 90% of the Donbass. And all this money, regardless if they get access to these frozen Russian bank accounts in Belgium, it's not going to turn the tides in battle. This has just become a lucrative money laundering project for the military-industrial complex in the United States and in Europe. And these politicians, Merz and Macron and Starmer, are acting in a lot of the similar ways toward Trump, despite all the theatrics of all the divides between them. All of those parties, all four that I just named, have foregone their citizens' interests for the sake of empire-building projects and adversarial posturing toward Russia and potentially escalating into a nuclear war. Something that no party would really want, but the military-industrial complex, because they benefit financially from it.
This is their so-called plan. It's wrong in every single regard. But I would say the following. If President Trump simply follows through right now and says, look, this is crazy. It's wrong in every regard. It's illegal. It's completely irrational in that it can't work. Ukraine will do nothing but die and lose even more territory and lives in this process. So the United States will not sell arms in any event. Even if the money is there, we're not going to be party to a continuation of this war. Then the war ends, period. So if Donald Trump follows through on the logic of the situation, it doesn't matter what Macron, Merz, and Starmer and Zelensky say at 10 Downing Street. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, totally agree with him there. It's known what it would take to end this war. You don't even have to involve Zelensky. You can cut and run and say, Zelensky, here's your peace deal. Take it or leave it. If you want to leave it, just rely on the Europeans. But it's like that's pretty utopian of an understanding to think that Donald Trump might suddenly adopt the lessons that Sachs knows from history, the lessons about NATO expansion, the lessons about the U.S. overthrowing the Yanukovych government in Ukraine in 2014 that led in many ways to this catastrophe. Trump, when pressed on this, said that's a war that would have never started if I was in office. But the truth is that the war started before you were in office. It started in 2014 when the U.S. played a role in that overthrow. And then there was a small-scale civil war that played out from the Donbas provinces that wanted to get out of Ukraine and Ukraine proper, with Ukrainians, the Ukrainian government shelling many of those Donbas villages. And the generally more pro-Russian peoples of that region wanting to break free from Ukraine. This is what produced the Minsk Accords, and Ukraine violated the Minsk Accords. They didn't give those people special political sovereignty as they had agreed to in Minsk II. But Donald Trump hasn't learned any of that. He just continues to take the advice of people like Lindsey Graham that want to fight on to the last man, no matter how many Ukrainians die in the process. And it's been over 1 million deaths and casualties from Ukraine in this disaster.
At all. So what has happened in the past, though, is that because of pressure from Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal and other senators on the take from the military contractors, Trump has, in his way, said, okay, I'm not putting any U.S. money in, but if someone wants to buy, I'm always ready to sell armaments. But that itself is very destructive and dangerous, actually. It doesn't even work because most of these weapon systems, the major ones, either the U.S. doesn't have the stockpiles anymore, or it would require actual active U.S. engagement in targeting and using and maintaining these weapons.
That's a great point. It's a point that very few people bring up, that even if you're building this into a proxy war to a proxy war where there's just one more layer, the U.S. is just selling the weapons to Europeans who later give them to the Ukrainians. A lot of the weapon system requires U.S. maintenance and U.S. intervention, so the U.S. would still be involved in a proxy war versus Russia. That won't mend animosities between the two countries, a nuclear power that the United States should trade with, not sanction to the brim and get into a political and military war with, not whatsoever. But it's not even fully true that Trump has said that. There's still, I think, something like $30 or $40 billion still designed to go to Ukraine. We just saw a new package go onto the congressional floor to give Ukraine an annual kind of stipend of support like the U.S. does toward Israel. That's just being shoved under the rug in mainstream media accounts, but that is on the table too. This is a long-term fleecing of the American people for the benefit of military contractors, and it's something that the U.S. should put an end to. It's not America first whatsoever.
The United States should say this war, from the U.S. point of view, is coming to an end. That means that it has to come to an end, even from the European and Ukrainian point of view. And there could be normal terms on the table, reflecting realities on the battlefield, yes, but that's actually what happens in wars, that the battlefield outcomes matter. But the core of this issue should be, and has been all along, that NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine, period, that Ukraine will be a neutral state, and that Europe will have its security because there will be a neutral Ukraine and nobody will be on each other's borders of the major powers. That would be very desirable.
Yeah, exactly. And the U.S. won't accept that either. You know, just say hypothetically, Russia engaged in a regime change effort in Canada, went to Quebec, replaced the government, and then you'd have military ballistic missiles set up essentially on the U.S. border. It just would not be allowed. Would not be acceptable from the U.S. vantage point if the tables were turned, and no one should really accept that. And NATO isn't just a defensive alliance. History proves that, say, the Balkans and Afghanistan and Libya want to talk about NATO as a defensive alliance. Those countries dare to oppose that kind of absurdity.
You'll be happy to know that about 2 hours ago, or less actually, the Guardian of London posted the following. I'm just going to read the first sentence. Donald Trump has hinted he could walk away from supporting Ukraine as he doubled down on his administration's recent criticism of Europe, describing it as weak and decaying and claiming it was destroying itself through immigration. I don't want to get into the immigration aspect, but the fact that he stated publicly these harsh criticisms of Europe and that the United States might walk away from Ukraine, that's probably the best thing he could do.
It is the best thing for Ukraine, first of all, contrary to what one might think, in a casual way. It would save Ukrainian lives. By the way, in the spring of 2022, after I had said the war could have been avoided entirely had we been clear about NATO and neutrality, but in the spring of 2022, I said, stop the fighting, make the peace on the basis that was almost agreed before the U.S. blocked it in a Ukraine-Russia agreement mediated by the government of Turkey in Istanbul. Do that and you'll save a lot of lives. The evidence is, though we don't have a precise count, that probably 2 million Ukrainians since then have been killed or gravely wounded.
Yeah, actually, he's exactly right about that. That's on the upper end of casualty estimates, but most parties that actually study this closely and aren't controlled by Kyiv actually do say that it's north of 1 million total casualties. And this is exactly right. Zelensky could have taken an agreement back in Istanbul that would have gave him way more than he could ever extract out of the Russians now that the Russians have occupied so much of his territory. And who talked him out of that? It was the United States and Britain under Boris Johnson. And this was a disaster in every single way. And, the United States should not pretend in our media. They're just gaslighting you when they say it's pro-Ukraine to fight to the last man, when 60-year-old men in Ukraine are being plucked off the streets against their will to state slavery to serve in this army. That isn't making inroads whatsoever. The jig is up. This is a lost cause at this point. The U.S. needs to get the hell out of it.
When I said that, of course, so many people in the mainstream media jumped up and down and said, oh, Sachs is anti-Ukraine. Saving 2 million lives is not anti-Ukraine. It's pro-Ukraine. Keeping this war going is not pro-Ukraine, it's anti-Ukraine. The Europeans are absolutely bizarre in thinking that they're helping the Ukrainian people. And Zelensky, just to be absolutely clear, does not represent the Ukrainian people. He rules by martial law over a corrupt regime. There have not been elections. And as best we can tell, which admittedly is hard, from Gallup and from other opinion surveys, the overwhelming majority of the Ukrainian people want a negotiated peace. So what Europe is doing is not pro-Ukrainian.
Exactly right. And this is the side of the story that never enters into Western media, how many uprisings and protests there have been against Zelensky recently, where a close advisor recently also stepped down because of a financial scandal involving a golden toilet and misallocated funds received from the United States. corrupt politicians in Ukraine skimming off the top while they're trying to tell you we're trying to fight this war. No, your administration is steeped in corruption, trying to expand martial law, continue to ban political opposition. Zelensky shut down Eastern Orthodox churches and adversarial media agents, but we're supposed to believe that this is about protecting democracy. No, if it was about protecting democracy, the U.S. wouldn't have overthrown Yanukovych in 2014 as part of the it's called the Revolution of Dignity, but it was really the Revolution of Stupidity and Revolution of Duplicity. That's what it was.
When he walked out of 10 Downing Street with the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, and of course the Prime Minister of Great Britain with him, he announced that he would not cede the territory now liberated by the Russian military. He really is out of his mind unless this kind of a bizarre statement is made for some domestic political purposes.
Yes, there are other things to do. I'm not at all privy to these discussions. Even if Ukraine doesn't, quote, cede the territory, it can, and by the way, again, if Trump just holds firm, the war is going to end, period.
Yeah, if Trump holds firm, the war is going to end, period. But, it takes a lot of finger crossing to even approach the prospect of that. Doesn't it seem like that? But Zelensky's in a place where he fears not the dissent of his entire populace. He actually fears more the dissent of the right-wing nationalists in his government, in the Svoboda Party, in the Azov Regiment that are literal neo-Nazis. They want to hide that truth from you, too. To continue to fight to the last man. They will not allow him to negotiate any peace. They have a proverbial dagger to his neck in that way, and I think Zelensky truly fears those forces within his own country much more so than he fears, say, Putin. So he has this incentive to try to keep going around to European countries, ask for the house, continue to try to do that in the United States, when none of the results of financial giving to Ukraine has paid dividends on the battlefield, and they just won't. That won't happen, so the best solution is to squash Zelensky, take him out of the negotiations completely, make a peace with Russia, and say, Zelensky, here's your peace, take it or leave it, we're out. Or if you want to take it, we'll help facilitate it and assure that the Russians will abide by it. That's what you could do as the U.S., but the U.S. will never not be seen as a belligerent by the Russians as long as it funds Ukraine. It has Ukraine's back. It does these stupid things like deploying nuclear submarines that Trump just did a few months ago. Or, go out on social media and say, maybe we'll reclaim all the lost territory. It's just such a pipe dream. And you're going to say, well, Putin can just stop invading now and this war will end. Well, yeah, but that doesn't exactly seem to be a realistic prospect at this point. The more realistic prospect is getting the U.S. out of there at this point and ending the war. It doesn't seem like that if you're Trump, who wants to continue this military industrial complex extraction of wealth from the American populace, but that's a lot more feasible, it seems, than saying pigs will fly or Ukraine's going to get Crimea back. It just doesn't seem to be the case. So I think Sachs is entirely right here. I have not seen evidence that Trump really is willing to walk away from this thing. He wants to build it into a proxy war where the weapons are still sold to Europeans, and that still binds America into this proxy war. And money will still exchange hands. Like I said earlier, I think 30 to 40 billion is still yet to be spent and planned to be spent on Ukraine. So much for ending this war in the first 24 hours, like Trump said. But what do you think? Do you think Jeffrey Sachs is right? Will there be an end to this? What would it take for this to be ended? And what do you think Zelensky's incentive structure is? And do you think he fears factions within his own country more than he does Putin? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Judge Napolitano. Really like this segment for sure. Sachs is a legend, of course, as you guys know that watch this channel. I adore him completely. And if you like this video, please consider supporting the channel by becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button down below. And if you do that, you'll gain immediate access to all my videos. The members only videos will immediately be viewable by you, and I really appreciate your support if you do that. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to a website. Just plug in your email and I'll send you that PDF of that book, full book, free of charge, no obligation whatsoever. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.